Hello everybody, my name is Rachel and welcome to another reading wrap-up. Today I'm going to cover a bunch of things that I read in the past 2 weeks. I didn't do a wrap-up last weekend because at that point I had barely finished anything. If you watched my most recent Friday Reads video, you probably know why. I was doing a lot of crochet and other stuff instead of reading, but I have gotten my reading mojo back and I've been doing a lot of that recently. So I think I've got 8 things to talk about today, plus another 2 that I will actually talk about in future videos if everything goes right. So I'm going to mention those 2 first. The first one is Everything is Made of Letters by Sofia Rhei. This is one of the Conversation Pieces books from Aqueduct Press, and it is a collection of translated short stories. I really enjoyed the stories in this. There are only 5, and I'm going to do a video where I talk about the individual stories and what I thought about this overall. I don't know, I liked it enough that I feel like I should give it a bit more attention rather than a quick overview and a wrap-up video. So more on this one coming soon. I also read Dreams Before the Start of Time by Anne Charnock. This is a short science fiction novel that won the Arthur C. Clarke Award last year, I believe, and I will be talking about this when I do my very last Arthur C. Clarke Award winners project wrap-up batch, which is like 2 years overdue at this point, but I'm trying to read the last couple of books for that project in June. So if everything goes right, you will see that video with this book by the end of June. While I was working on a lot of crochet projects recently, I listened to a bunch of audiobooks. The first one is My Cousin Rachel by Daphne du Maurier. I read Rebecca years ago and quite liked it, and just on a whim I decided to get My Cousin Rachel and try reading it as an audiobook rather than in a physical form, which is like how I read Rebecca, and I'm glad I did because I don't remember the narrator's name, but it was really good to listen to on audiobook. So the story is told by a young man who his uncle who raised him goes to Italy for his health. He meets a woman there named Rachel who is basically a distant cousin, and then this man's uncle marries Rachel. Strange things happen, he dies, and the narrator basically is convinced that his cousin Rachel is the cause of his uncle's death, and then she appears in England and he actually gets to meet her. I really liked the way that this story kept me guessing, but there was also something about it that didn't feel as complex as what I was expecting, and I'm not exactly sure how to explain that, but I think I gave this 4 out of 5 stars on Goodreads, mainly because at some points in this book I was absolutely convinced that the narrator was right and Rachel was basically a Black Widow who killed her husbands, and then there were also times when I was absolutely convinced that the narrator, whose name I have forgotten, was paranoid and delusional and imagining things that weren't real. And by the end of the book, I did not know what to think anymore, and the way that it ended was rather chilling, let's say. So I liked it, and I think I will try to read more by du Maurier. I may also see if my library has more audiobooks of her work because that seems to be a good way to experience them. After that, I listened to 2 classic 1800 science fiction novels by Jules Verne. Those are 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and Journey to the Center of the Earth. I really enjoyed 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. This is the really famous story with the Nautilus and Captain Nemo. A man, like I want to say a scientist or a researcher, a natural philosopher of the day, let's say, named Aronnax, his aide Conseil, and a man they know who is a Canadian whale harpooner. They end up kind of being taken prisoner by Captain Nemo on his ship. They were looking for him and what his ship was, and they go on this adventure where they travel 20,000 leagues around the world but underwater in this submersible. And I really enjoyed it, mainly because it's an underwater adventure, and that's fascinating. Even today, more than 100 years later, underwater adventures, oceanic explorations are quite rare in science fiction, and I think it's a fascinating topic. There are a lot of descriptions of the plants and the fish and animals and stuff in the ocean. Maybe it's a little bit info dumpy, but it was still really interesting because I never read anything quite like it before. So yeah, I mean, there are some parts of this that are definitely dated. I don't think that much of the science is particularly dated. Verne was definitely ahead of his time in some of his predictions about submarines and underwater exploration and stuff. But there were a couple of chapters that I think display some of the colonialism and racism of the day, and that wasn't great, but I was also surprised at how outspoken at least one of the characters was about treating native peoples better or leaving them alone, and also some sort of ecological themes. So not perfect, but this is one that I would actually recommend that people read if you are interested in older science fiction from the really early days of the genre. I cannot say the same thing about Journey to the Center of the Earth. I really didn't like this book. It was such a letdown after 20,000 Leagues. I disliked the characters in this so much. I found them aggravating and annoying. This story is about a young man, his uncle Lindenbrock, who is a mineralogist or geologist, who get wind of a possible passage to the center of the earth. They travel to Iceland to find this thing and attempt to go into the bowels of the earth and, you know, maybe prove once and for all what is the structure of the inner part of the earth. This is extremely scientifically inaccurate. Number one, in ways that are glaringly obvious that you don't really see in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And I hated the characters. The narrator is the young man, and just number one, he doesn't want to be on this adventure. He is dragged along when he does not want to go. He's kind of whiny. He faints and loses consciousness a lot. He just doesn't want to be there. It's not much of an adventure when one of your main characters doesn't want to be there. And his uncle, who is forcing everyone into doing this, was basically just a jerk who is pedantic and paternalistic and completely oblivious to what other people want. And yeah, I'll leave it at that. They do not actually get to the center of the earth, which is the nail in the coffin for me. Like, what is the point of all of this if it just peters out at the end? So I do not recommend this one, but 20,000 Leagues, that was good. I've also come to the end of my Shakespeare binge with Richard III. I'm really glad that I pushed through the 3 parts of Henry VI and everything to get to this, because while the previous plays in chronological order were alright, they were not amazing. I can see why a lot of those aren't performed that frequently and aren't as well known, but Richard III is a very well-known historical play by Shakespeare, and I can see why I liked this. This is basically just Richard III being a horrible person, such a villain. There are so many great quotable lines and speeches and stuff from this, and I'm not good at talking about Shakespeare in depth. This is why I watch Libby's videos. But yeah, I'm really glad I read this one. And I'm kind of sad I don't have more Shakespeare on hand to read right now because I'm in the mood for it. Usually I wait and buy lots of these Folger editions because I like that it has all of the notes and explanations on the side. But after reading a whole bunch of these plays in a row, I've noticed that I really understand the language without the assistance of the notes as much. So I think I may go to the library and get some free Shakespeare plays and see if I can read them that way. If it doesn't work out, I'll just default to, you know, getting my Folger editions, but right now I'm trying not to spend so much money on books, but I really want to read Coriolanus and some things like that, so we'll see what I end up doing. Next up, I read an anthology called If This Goes On, edited by Cat Rambo. Parvis Press sent this to me for a review because I was interested in it. This anthology is very much a reaction to the 2016 US election and Donald Trump's presidency. It's very, very blatantly about that. That is the reason why this anthology exists, and I kind of want to emphasize this now because this is absolutely political in its existence and its nature, in what the stories are talking about. The title tells you everything you need to know. If the politics and policies of right now continue, what will the world be like in the future? And it has some grim, depressing stuff in it. I will say right up front that I feel like it was a little on the nose sometimes about what it wanted to say. This is mainly because Rambo has an afterword to each of the stories where she explains kind of the meaning of it and how it connects to today. And I thought that was actually quite unnecessary. I think the stories really spoke for themselves. And if somebody's gonna pick this up and read it, it's probably because they agree with the opinions of the editor and a lot of the writers, and they don't need that explanation. Aside from that, the stories themselves, I liked a lot of this actually. I'm a big fan of E. Lily Yu, and she has the first story in this, which I was a bit surprised to say I vaguely liked it, but I found it really unmemorable. If I can remember what some of these are, like 12 Histories Scrawled in the Sky by Amy Ogden. I think I liked that one. All the Good Dogs Have Been Eaten by Gregory Jeffers. If I remember this one correctly, I also like that, but it's not a happy one. Mustard Seeds and the Elephant's Foot by Priya Sridhar. A Gardener's Guide to the Apocalypse by Lynette Mejia. I liked that one, and oh my gosh, it reminded me of Naomi Kritzer's short fiction, and I do really like Kritzer's style, so yeah, that one was good. There were also a couple of them in here that I just didn't like, and I won't talk about those, but that's pretty much what you're gonna get with an anthology. Some duds, some things you really love, and a lot of things in the middle. But yeah, this was quite good. Then I continued with the Lumberjanes series with volume 11. This one is called Time After Crime. It is written by Shannon Waters and Kat Lee, and the illustrations are by Amy Sotuyo. I love the premise of Lumberjanes, and I've really enjoyed more of the longer story arcs that I've developed after the first couple of volumes. It's about a bunch of girls at a summer camp, and in this one, everyone knows that time is kind of odd around a camp. It seems like time runs more slowly at camp than it does in the outside world, but also lots of other crazy things are happening. One of the girls makes a decision to kind of adjust time in her favor more. She doesn't want to leave camp. She doesn't want to go home to her family, and what she does has some bad consequences, and she and her friends need to fix that. And I like the story in this one. That was a good story, and I like seeing more about that particular character, and you know, I want to know more about the girls' families and such, and their lives outside of camp. You know, what is it that they need from summer camp? What is it that they need from their group of friends? But there was just something about this volume that felt too short and perfunctory, and I didn't like the art style in it. I've seen Sotuyo's illustrations in previous volumes. Maybe she did some of the issues, but not the entire thing, but this volume is all her artwork, and it just looks kind of sloppy to me. It has the colors and the action, the movement that I expect from Lumberjanes artwork, but I think it always comes down to whether I like the way that the characters are drawn or not, and there's something about the way that a lot of their faces are drawn that is not what I think of when I think of these character designs. So this one was all right. I hope the next one is better. I feel like I have kind of similar things to say about the other comic I have to talk about today. That is volume 1 of The Promised Neverland. This is by Kaiu, Shirai, and Posuka Demizu. This is a manga series, and Rhea from the Bookfinch has recommended it multiple times, and I picked up the first volume because it was in her manga recommendations for Ravenclaw's video. And you know, I am a Ravenclaw if you couldn't tell. So yeah, I read this and I'm kind of withholding judgment on it. I did not like the art style. I don't like the illustration. This is a type of manga anime style that is not what I enjoy, the way that characters are drawn, some of the really big exaggerations and character designs and facial expressions and stuff, not really my thing. But I am withholding judgment because I'm curious about how the premise will develop past the first volume. It's about a group of very young children who live in isolation, kind of at an orphanage in a way. They're all waiting to grow up a bit and be adopted, and they are tested every day. Their life is actually a bit strange. They have contact with only one adult and they have no idea what is actually going on in the outside world. They're forbidden from going past the gate into the world. And then two of the older children make a shocking discovery about what is going on, and it pivots from being cheerful and fun and all about childhood and life is great to just like complete 180 to really dark and kind of terrifying territory. And wow, I don't know if I like that yet or not. So yeah, I'm going to read another volume or two of this and see what I think, because I do think it is an interesting idea. It's just whether the writing and the premise grabs me enough that I can kind of get over the art style. And lastly, for this wrap-up, I read another short story collection, and that is called Word Puppets by Mary Robinette Kowal. This is now 4 or 5 years old. I think it came out in 2015. And what's most interesting about this collection for me is that for the most part, the stories are arranged in chronological order by publication date, so you can kind of see this evolution of Kowal's writing, the development of her style, the voice that she uses, and just the strength of the ideas in her stories. I buddy read this with Maya, and it was really nice to have somebody to kind of bounce some ideas off of, some of our reactions to the individual stories. So the first couple of stories in this I was relatively unimpressed by. I felt like they were quite generic and like anyone could have written them. But then we got to the point where some of the stories were from 2008 or 2009, and it's just like, wow, all of a sudden they felt like stories by Kowal. I could recognize her voice. These stories had her stamp on them. She was writing about themes and people and ideas that I just felt like were her thing. So after the first couple of stories, there were a bunch that I really enjoyed. I wish I made a list of them. I don't have my Kindle with me right now. I read it on ebook. But yeah, especially some of the slightly longer pieces really stood out to me. If you love her Lady Astronaut novels, this contains 2 stories from that universe, the Hugo-winning Lady Astronaut of Mars story, as well as a story that's new to this collection called Rockets Red, which is actually one of the slightly more throwaway stories in this, in my opinion. Yes, it is set in the Lady Astronaut universe, but it is very short and it's basically just a fun, feel-good story. There's also a third story that I don't think is canonically part of the Lady Astronaut universe, but it features an event which is in appearance is exactly the same as a major event in the novels. And I'm not sure if it's Kowal exploring the same idea but in different stories, or if this could be kind of background information on what happened at the beginning of the Calculating Stars. I wonder if she's ever addressed that or not. I have to go look that up. And I think one thing that really stands out to me about Kowal's work that's really present in her short stories is that she is great at mimicking styles and voices. In particular, there is a Sherlock Holmes style story in this that just, it felt so much like the voice of an actual Arthur Conan Doyle story, and it was great. Kowal is also known for playing some pranks where she pretends to be other people on social media, which Patrick Rothfuss talks about in the introduction to this collection, and it's really true. She is great at that, just picking the right phrasing and words and tone, and it feels so real. So yeah, so that is everything that I've read. I will talk about a couple more of these in future videos, like I said. Let me know if you have read any of these, if you have any thoughts on them. Leave me some comments down below. As always, thank you so much for watching me babble on and on. I'll be back to talk to you again soon, and until then, bye.